welcome listeners throughout time and space to continue with this reading of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice by James Branch Cabell. Here's chapter 5. Requirements of bread and butter. Nessus, says Jurgen, and am I so changed, for that Dorothy, whom I loved in youth, did not know me? Good and evil keep very exact accounts, replied the centaur, and the face of every man is their ledger. Meanwhile the sun rises, it is already another workday. And when the shadows of those two who come to take possession fall full upon the garden, I warn you, there will be astounding changes brought about by the requirements of bread and butter. You have not time to revive old memories by chatting with the others to whom you babbled aforetime in this garden. Ah, centaur, in the garden between dawn and sunrise, there was never any other save Dorothy la Désirée. The centaur shrugged. It may be you forget. It is certain that you underestimate the local population. Some of the transient visitors you have seen, and in addition hereabouts, dwell the year round all manner of imaginary creatures. The fairies live just southward, and the gnomes too. To your right is the realm of the Valkyries. The Amazons and the Cynophalae are their allies. All three of these nations are continually at loggerheads with their neighbors, the Baba Yagas, whom Morphi cooks for, and whose monarch is O, a person very dangerous to name. Northward dwell the leprechauns and the men of hunger, whose king is Clawbear. My people, who are ruled by Chiron, live even further to the north. The Sphinx pastures on yonder mountain, and now the chimera is old and generally derided. They say that Cerberus visits the Sphinx at twilight, although I was never the person to disseminate scandal. Centaur, said Jurgen, and what is Dorothy doing here? Why, all the women that any man has ever loved live here, replied the centaur, for very obvious reasons. That is a hard saying, friend. Nessus tapped with his forefinger upon the back of Jurgen's hand. Worm's meat. This is the destined food. Do what you will of small white worms. This by and by will be a struggling pale corruption, like seething milk. That too is a hard saying, Jurgen, but it is a true saying. And was that Dorothy whom I loved in youth an imaginary creature? My poor Jurgen, you were once a poet. She was your masterpiece. For there was only a shallow, stupid, and airy, high-nosed, and light-haired miss with no remarkable good looks, and consider what your ingenuity made from such poor material. You should be proud of yourself. No, centaur, I cannot very well be proud of my folly, yet I do not regret it. I have been befooled by a bright shadow of my own raising, you tell me, and I concede it to be probable. No less, I served a lovely shadow, and my heart will keep the memory of that loveliness until life ends, in a world where other men follow pantingly after shadows which are not even pretty. There is something in that, Jurgen. There is also something in an old tale we used to tell in Thessaly about a fox and certain grapes. Well, but look you, Nessus, there is an emperor that reigns now in Constantinople and occasionally does business with me. Yes, and I could tell you tales of by what shifts he came to the throne. Men's hands are by ordinary soiled in climbing, quoth the centaur. And, Jurgen, this emperor says to me, not many months ago, as he sat in his palace, crowned and dreary, and trying to cheat me out of my fair profit on some emeralds, Jurgen, I cannot sleep of nights because of that fool Alexius, who comes into my room with staring eyes and the bowstring still about his neck, and my Varangians must be in league with that silly ghost, because I constantly order them to keep Alexius out of my bedchamber, and they do not obey me, Jurgen. To be king of the East is not to the purpose, Jurgen, when one must submit to such vexations. Yes, it was Caesar Pharamond himself said this to me, and I deduce the shadow of a crown has led him into an ugly pickle, for all that he is the mightiest monarch in the world. And I would not change with Caesar Pharamond, not I who am a respectable pawnbroker with my home and fee and my bit of tilled land. Well, this is a queer world, to be sure. And this garden is visited by no stranger things than pop into a man's mind sometimes without his knowing how. Ah, but you must understand that the garden is speedily to be remodeled. Yonder you may observe the two whose requirements are to rid the place of all fantastic, unremunerative notions, and who will develop the natural resources of this garden according to generally approved methods. And from afar, Jurgen could see two figures coming out of the east, so tall that their heads rose above the encircling hills and glistened in the rays of a sun which was not yet visible. One was a white, pasty-looking giant with a crusty expression. He walked with the aid of a cane. The other was a pale yellow color. His face was oily, and he rode on a vast cow that was called Edhumla. Make way there, brother, with your staff of life, says the yellow giant, for there is much to do hereabouts. Aye, brother, this place must be altered a deal before it meets with our requirements, the other grumbled. May I be toasted if I know where to begin. Then as the giants turned dull and harsh faces toward the garden, the sun came above the circle of blue hills, so that the mingled shadows of these two giants fell across the garden. For an instant Jurgen saw the place oppressed by that attenuated mile-long shadow, as in heraldry you may see a black bar painted sheer across some brightly emblazoned shield. Then the radiancy of everything twitched and vanished as a bubble bursts, and Jurgen was standing in the midst of a field very neatly plowed, but with nothing as yet growing in it. And the centaur was with him still, it seemed, for there were the creature's hoofs, but all the gold had been washed or rubbed away from them in traveling with Jurgen. See, Nessus, Jurgen cried, the garden is made desolate. Oh, Nessus, was it fair that so much loveliness should be thus wasted? Nay, said the centaur, nay. Long and wailing he whinnied, nay. And when Jurgen raised his eyes, he saw that his companion was not a centaur, but only a strayed riding horse. Were you the animal then, says Jurgen? And was it a quite ordinary animal that conveyed me to the garden between dawn and sunrise? And Jurgen laughed disconsolately. At all events, you have clothed me in a curious fine shirt, and how I look, your bridle is marked with a coronet. So I will return you to the castle of Belgard, and it may be that Hetman Michael will reward me. Then Jurgen mounted this horse and rode away from the plowed field wherein nothing grew as yet. As they left the furrows, they came to a signboard with writing on it in a peculiar red and yellow lettering. Jurgen paused to decipher this. "Read me," was written on the signboard. "Read me and judge if you understand. So you stopped in your journey because I called, scenting something unusual, something droll. Thus, although I am nothing, and even less, there is no one that sees me but lingers here. Stranger, I am a law of the universe. Stranger, render the law what is due the law." Jurgen felt cheated. A very foolish signboard indeed, for how can it be a law of the universe when there is no meaning to it, says Jurgen. Why, for any law to be meaningless would not be fair. Chapter 6. Showing that Saretta is feminine. Then, having snapped his fingers at that foolish signboard, Jurgen would have turned easterly toward Belgard, but his horse resisted. The pawnbroker decided to accept this as an omen. "Forward, then," he said, "in the name of Cochet," and thereafter Jurgen permitted the horse to choose its own way. Thus Jurgen came through a forest, wherein he saw many things not salutary to notice, to a great stone house like a prison, and he sought shelter there. But he could find nobody about the place until he came to a large hall, newly swept. This was a depressing apartment, in its chill, neat emptiness, for it was unfurnished, save for a bare deal table upon which lay a yardstick and a pair of scales. Above this table hung a wicker cage containing a blue bird and another wicker cage containing 3 white pigeons. And in this hall a woman, no longer young, dressed all in blue and wearing a white towel by way of headdress, was assorting curiously colored cloths. She had very bright eyes with wrinkled lids, and now as she looked up at Jurgen, her shrunk jaws quivered. "Ah," says she, "I have a visitor. Good day to you in your glittering shirt. It is a garment I seem to recognize." "Good day, grandmother. I am looking for my wife, whom I suspect to have been carried off by a devil. Poor fellow. Now, having lost my way, I have come to pass the night under your roof." "Very good, but few come seeking Mother Saretta of their own accord." Then Jurgen knew with whom he talked, and inwardly he was perturbed, for all the Leshy are unreliable in their dealings. So when he spoke, it was very civilly. "And what do you do here, grandmother?" "I bleach. In time I shall bleach that garment you are wearing, for I take the color out of all things. Thus you see these stuffs here as they are now. Clotho spun the glowing threads, and Lachesis wove them, as you observe, in curious patterns, very marvelous to see. But when I am done with these stuffs, there will be no more color or beauty or strangeness anywhere apparent than in so many dishclouts. Now I perceive, says Jurgen, that your power and dominion is more great than any other power which is in the world. He made a song of this in praise of the Leshy and their days, but more especially in praise of the might of Mother Sereda and of the ruins that have fallen on Wednesday. To Shetverg and Uternik and Subota he gave their due. Pyathinka and Nelduka also did Jurgen commend for such demolishments as have enregistered their names in the calendar of saints, no less. Ah, but there was none like Mother Sereda. Hers was the center of that power which is the Leshy's. The others did but nibble at temporal things like furtive mice. She devastated like a sandstorm, so that there were many dust heaps where Mother Sereda had passed, but nothing else. And so on and so on. The song was no masterpiece, and would not be bettered by repetition. But it was all untrammeled eulogy, and the old woman beat time to it with her lean hands, and her shrunk jaws quivered, and she nodded her white-wrapped head this way and that way with a rolling motion, and on her thin lips was a very proud and foolish smile. That is a good song, says she. Oh yes, an excellent song. But you report nothing of my sister Pandalus, who controls the day of the moon. Monday, says Jurgen. Yes, I neglected Monday, perhaps because she is the oldest of you, but in part because of the exigencies of my rhyme scheme. We must let Pendulous go unhymned. How can I remember everything when I consider the might of Sereda? Why, but, says Mother Sereda, Pandalus may not like it, and she may take holiday from her washing some day to have a word with you. However, I repeat, that is an excellent song. And in return for your praise of me, I will tell you that if your wife has been carried off by a devil, your affair is one which Koshchei alone can remedy. Assuredly, I think it is to him you must go for justice. But how can I come to him, grandmother? Oh, as to that, it does not matter at all which road you follow. All highways, as the saying is, lead roundabout to Koshchei. The one thing needful is not to stand still. This much I will tell you also for your song's sake, because that was an excellent song, and nobody ever made a song in praise of me before today. Now Jurgen wondered to see what a simple old creature was this Mother Sereda who sat before him, shaking and grinning and frail as a dead leaf, with her head wrapped in a common kitchen towel, and whose power was so enormous. To think of it, Jurgen reflected, that the world I inhabit is ordered by beings who are not 1/10 so clever as I am. I have often suspected as much, and it is decidedly unfair. Now let me see if I cannot make something out of being such a monstrous, clever fellow. Jurgen said aloud, I do not wonder that no practicing poet ever presumed to make a song of you. You are too majestical. You frighten these rhymesters, who feel themselves to be unworthy of so great a theme. So it remained for you to be appreciated by a pawnbroker, since it is we who handle and observe the treasures of this world after you have handled them. "Do you think so?" says she, more pleased than ever. "Now may be that was the way of it, but I wonder that you, who are so fine a poet, should ever have become a pawnbroker." "Well, and indeed, Mother Soretta, your wonder seems to me another wonder, for I can think of no profession better suited to a retired poet. Why, there is the variety of company, for high and low, and even the genteel are pressed sometimes for money. Then the ploughman slouches into my shop, and the Duke sends for me privately. So the people I know and the bits of their lives I pop into give me a deal to romance about." "Ah, yes, indeed," says Mother Soretta wisely. "That well may be the case, but I do not hold with romance myself. Moreover, sitting in my shop, I wait there quiet-like, while tribute comes to me from the ends of earth. Everything which men and women have valued anywhere comes sooner or later to me, and jewels and fine knick-knacks that were the pride of queens they bring me, and wedding rings, and the baby's cradle with his little tooth marks on the rim of it, and silver coffin handles, or it may be an old frying pan they bring me. It all comes to Jurgen. So that just to sit there in my dark shop, quiet-like, and wonder about the history of my belongings and how they were made, mine is poetry, and is the deep and high and ancient thinking of a God who is dozing among what time is left of a dead world. If you understand me, Mother Soretta." "I understand. Oh, I understand that which pertains to gods for a sufficient reason. And then another thing, you do not need any turn for business. People are glad to get whatever you choose to offer, for they would not come otherwise. So you get the shining and rough-edged coins that you can feel the proud king's head on, with his laurel wreath like millet seed under your fingers, and you get the flat and greenish coins that are smeared with the titles and the chins and hooked noses of emperors whom nobody remembers or cares about any longer, and all just by waiting there quietly and making a favor of it to let customers give you their belongings for a third of what they are worth. And that is easy labor, even for a poet. I understand all labor. And people treat you a deal more civilly than any real need is, because they are ashamed of trafficking with you at all. I dispute if a poet could get such civility shown him in any other profession. And finally, there is the long idleness between business interviews, with nothing to do save sit there quiet-like and think about the queerness of things in general. And that is always rare employment for a poet, even without the tatters of so many lives and homes heaped up about him like spillikins. So that I would say in all, Mother Soretta, there is certainly no profession better suited to an old poet than the profession of pawnbroking. And a great deal more I could be saying too, Godmother, but for the fear of wearying you. Nor would I have run on at all about my private affairs were it not that we two are so close related, and kith makes kind, as people say. But how can you and I be kin? Why, heyday, and was I not born upon a Wednesday? That makes you my godmother, does it not? I do not know, dearie, I am sure. Nobody ever cared to claim kin with Mother Soretta before this, says she pathetically. There can be no doubt, though, on the point, no possible doubt. Sibelius states it plainly. Artemidorus Millenor, I grant you, holds the question debatable, but his reasons for doing so are tolerably notorious. Besides, what does all his family flimsy sophistry avail against Nicanor's fine chapter on this very subject? Crushing, I consider it. His logic is final and irrefutable. What can anyone say against Savius Nicanor? Ah, what indeed? Demanded Jurgen. And he wondered if there might not have been perchance some such persons somewhere after all. Their names, in any event, sounded very plausible to Jurgen. Ah, dearie, I was never one for learning. It may be as you say. You say, it may be, godmother. That embarrasses me rather, because I was about to ask for my christening gift, which in the press of other matters you overlooked some 40 years back. You will readily conceive that your negligence, however unintentional, might possibly give rise to unkindly criticism, and so I felt I ought to mention it in common fairness to you. As for that, dearie, ask what you will within the limits of my power, for mine are all the sapphires and turquoises and whatever else in this dusty world is blue, and mine likewise are all the Wednesdays that have ever been or ever will be, and any one of these will I freely give you in return for your fine speeches and your tender heart. Ah, but godmother, would it be quite just for you to accord me so much more than is granted to other persons? Why, no, but what have I to do with justice? I bleach. Come now, then, do you make a choice? For I can assure you that my sapphires are of the first water, and that many of my oncoming Wednesdays will be well worth seeing. No, godmother, I never greatly cared for jewelry, and the future is but dressing and undressing, and shaving and eating, and computing percentage, and so on. The future does not interest me now. So I shall modestly content myself with a second-hand Wednesday, with one that you have used and have no further need of, and it will be a Wednesday in the August of such and such a year. Mother Sarita agreed to this. For there are certain rules to be observed, says she, for one must have system. As she spoke, she undid the towel about her head, and she took a blue comb from her white hair, and she showed Jurgen what was engraved on the comb. It frightened Jurgen a little, but he nodded assent. First, though, says Mother Sarita, here is the blue bird. Would you not rather have that, dearie, than your Wednesday? Most people would. Ah, but, godmother, he replied, I am Jurgen. No, it is not the bluebird I desire. So Mother Sarita took from the wall the wicker cage containing the 3 white pigeons. Then Jurgen set about that which Mother Sarita said was necessary. All right. Go to YouTube, subscribe to Roarshock channel, and you'll find this whole story there, but I will be doing it live here on Periscope, while Periscope still lasts. Thanks very much for listening.